A dark and twisted true story. My girlfriend, Jane, and I had been together for over 10 years and were deeply in love. Of course, like all couples, we had our fights, but for the most part, we got along exceptionally well. We even had plans to marry and have kids sometime in the future, and had always promised to be honest with one another no matter what. We never kept secrets. We were from the big city, and one thing that we had in common was we hated it. We wanted to relocate to a smaller town with a lower population, a place where we could settle down and raise a family. So one day, spontaneously, we decided to pack our things and move. I know this is going to sound crazy, but we had no destination in mind. We just packed everything that we owned into the trunk of our car, as well as the back seat, then hit the road. A nasty storm was brewing, so we decided to pull over at a gas station. We asked the attendant where we were. He said that we were in a small town in Colorado, and that is where we decided to live. A few months had passed with no luck in finding a permanent job. The jobs that we did find were only temporary and didn't pay shit to live off of. The little money that we had left with was almost gone, and we were in desperate need of cash and was on the verge of losing everything that we owned. We even considered moving back to the big city to move in with my sister and her husband. That was the last thing that we wanted to do. But the sand in our hourglass was beginning to run thin. 2 weeks later, and still no luck in finding jobs. So there I sat in our living room, waiting for Jane to get home from the grocery store. I was prepared to tell her that it was time to move back to the big city. But instead, I was greeted with her running up to me with a big smile, accompanied by a warm embrace. I had never saw her as happy as I did at that moment. At first, I thought that maybe she had won the lottery or something, but that was not the case. She looked up at me and said, "Oh, you're not going to believe this. I got a job as the manager of the grocery store, and they want me to start immediately. It pays very well," she said. We were so happy. Everything was perfect, or at least it appeared to be, for the moment. A couple of months went by, and financially, our lives had improved. Bills were paid ahead of time, and we even began to plan our wedding. But things started to happen that worried me. Such as, one day, I looked out of the window and noticed an expensive-looking car parked in our driveway. And I was surprised to find out that it belonged to Jane. She had purchased a brand new car. A car that looked too expensive for us to afford. But it didn't stop there. Her wardrobe had changed as well. She had started going on shopping sprees, and to make me feel better, She bought me expensive items as well, which I'm not gonna lie, I liked it. I tried not to question things because I didn't want to seem as though I wasn't grateful for our lives finally being better, and we didn't have to worry about money any longer. But something felt a bit off and uneasy, but I just continued to shrug it off and enjoy our new lifestyle. One day, while I was out, I had stopped by the grocery store that Jane was managing and wanted to surprise her with lunch. But when I asked one of the employees to get Jane for me, he told me there was no such person working there by that name. I figured that he was just new and didn't know who she was, but that didn't make sense because she was the manager and was the person in charge of hiring. So I asked to speak to the supervisor, who also confirmed that the first guy was right. Jane did not work there. As a matter of fact, no one had even heard of her. I even showed them her photo, but still, they said they had never, ever saw her. Jane was obviously lying to me, but why? Why would she lie to me? And if that was the case, how was she getting all of that money? I had questions for Jane, and I rushed home to confront her. When I arrived back home, I yelled for Jane, but she wasn't home yet. I then noticed that she had bought one of those expensive new MacBook Pro laptops, and it was all spec'd out. Obviously very expensive, costing at least $6 grand. Too much cash for a grocery store manager's salary. Something told me to open it, and that's exactly what I did, only to find that she had left her browser open to a website called OnlyFans. I had never heard of this website, but after Googling it, my mouth dropped open, and it felt as if time had stopped. It was a website where people traded sexual favors for cash. I was beside myself, and it got worse, much worse. Jane had a profile on there, a profile that was so disgusting and provocative that I can't even talk about what I saw. I immediately slammed down the lid, rushed downstairs, and waited for Jane to arrive back home. There I was, pacing the floor for over an hour, so much to the point that the carpet was beginning to wear thin. Then finally, her car pulled up in the driveway. I was so ready to give her a piece of my mind, as well as tell her that it was over between us and that I could no longer trust her. But then, all of a sudden, she ran inside, then slammed the door behind her. She was in panic. "What the hell is going on?" I yelled, and before she could speak, I laid it on her. I told her that I knew all about her OnlyFans account and how she lied to me for months, and that was how she was getting her money. To my surprise, she didn't deny any of it. In fact, she told me that one of her clients turned out to be a rapist murderer who had recently escaped from prison, and she had no idea at the time when she met him. He lied and told her that he was an attorney for the rich. I tried to ask her more questions, but was immediately interrupted by her telling me there was no time to explain, and that the man was on his way to her house to kill her because she had told him that she was breaking it off with him after she had decided that she couldn't lie to me any longer. I began to panic myself and pushed the sofa and a few tables in front of the front and back doors. I even called the cops and told them that the rapist that they had been looking for was on his way to my home to kill my wife and I. But in typical cop fashion, they thought it was just a silly prank, then hung up on me. 2 minutes later, we heard the sounds of tires come to a halt in our driveway. And when I looked out of our window, there he was, sitting in a large black SUV. We immediately ran into the basement where I kept my hunting rifle. We were both so scared that we were shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to comfort her, but after what she had did, I just couldn't. Then we heard the basement door open. Seconds later, the heavy sounds of footsteps crept slowly down the stairs. I gripped my rifle tightly and was ready to open fire as the footsteps grew nearer. But then, out of nowhere, we heard sirens outside of our home, followed by the sounds of the man's footsteps briskly running back upstairs. 15 seconds later, we heard the sounds of gunshots and a huge thud on the floor above us. As we traveled back upstairs, there the man was, lying dead on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Apparently, Miss Nosy, our nosy next-door neighbor, called the police after seeing a suspicious-looking man enter our house with a gun. Thank God for nosy neighbors. It was my first time being back in my hometown since I moved to the UK 2 years ago. I was excited to see my mother, who I had always been close to, and we hadn't seen each other since I left. She was the best mother in the world, and I mean that from the heart. I would be staying for at least a month, and we had made plans to spend some mother and son quality time together. It's true what they say, there is no place like home. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, the memories of growing up sped through my mind like pages being flipped in a book. I was happy to be back home, and it felt quite nice. The following morning, I was awakened by the delicious aroma of my mother's breakfast food. By the way, my mother have always been a fantastic cook, so much to the point that she ended up selling her famous recipe for ridiculous sums of money back in the 1990s, enough to make her a wealthy woman. But my mother lived a modest life. My father died when I was only 13, and even though my mother didn't look her age and was considered by many as an overly attractive woman, she never remarried, which I respected. One night, I had arrived back home after being out with a couple of friends. Usually, that time of night, my mother was fast asleep, but I noticed her bedroom light was still on, so I wanted to check up on her. As I walked up the stairs, I noticed the sound of crying. It was coming from her room. So I knocked on the door and asked if she was okay. She told me to come on in, and when I did, there she was, lying there, with tears pouring down her face. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" I asked. Then she patted the spot next to her as I sat down. I asked her what was the matter, and she told me that she needed to confess something. She had lost the majority of her money and was on the verge of losing everything, which came to me as a huge shock. I offered to lend as much money as I could from my savings account, but my mother was a stubborn woman and refused to take a handout from her son. However, I told her that she could just look at it as if it was a loan, but she still refused. She said that she would find some way to fix her problem and that she didn't want me worrying about her. So we called it a night and we discussed it no further. A week later, I asked her if everything was okay. She said yes, that she had found a way to take care of her debts. I was so happy to hear that and offered to cook dinner for her later that night. The following night, around 11 p.m., I noticed that my mother wasn't home yet. Earlier that morning, she had told me that she would be out with friends, but would be back around 8 p.m. for bed. My mother had always been a punctual person. Something was wrong, and I could feel it. I called her cell phone, but there was no answer. I was beginning to really worry. So I called up her friends that she had went out with that night, and each one of them said that she never showed up. They were worried as well. I knew that it would be a waste of time to call the cops since it hadn't been 48 hours in order to file a missing persons report. So instead, I went out to find her on my own. I had been driving around for over an hour with no luck when I got a call from a friend of mine. He told me that he had something that he wanted to tell me that would most likely upset me as well as gross me out. I told him to stop beating around the bush and just to tell me what the higgity hell he was talking about. He said that he couldn't bring himself to even say it and would send me a link on my phone instead. So I pulled over to the side of the road and waited for the link. When I clicked on it, it led me to a profile page on a website called OnlyFans, a sexually themed website where people did sexual favors for cash. And what I saw had not only brought me to tears, it made me nauseous as well. It was my mother's profile. I was shocked, speechless, hurt, as well as overcome with a feeling of disgust. My mother doing no telling what with and for strangers. How could she go so far into doing something so vile? What the fuck? It felt as if my entire world had been flipped upside down and inside out. I immediately sped home so fast that I almost crashed into the garage. I got out of my car, ran through the door, and headed upstairs to my mother's bedroom. I logged on to her computer and headed to the website. Luckily, I was able to guess her password, which just so happened to be my birth date. I shuffled through her inbox and saw a message from a man named Chad offering to meet up with her at his house for sex in exchange for cash. So I ran down the stairs as fast as my legs could carry me. and sped off down the road in search for my mother. When I arrived at the address, it was an old abandoned-looking house. Some of the windows were boarded up while others were broken. I slowly creeped up to the garage and looked through the tiny broken windows when I noticed my mother's car inside. Then, all of a sudden, I heard screaming coming from the basement. I quickly ran to the back of the house, crawled through the back window, grabbed a baseball bat, then headed down to the basement. And there she was, my mother, tied to a chair, her face covered in bloody cuts, and appearing behind her was a man. He had a large knife in his hand. "Please don't kill me, Chad," cried my mother. But the man just stood there, smiling like the devil himself. So I reached inside of my pocket for my phone to call the cops, but noticed that I must have left it in my car. But as I turned around to leave, I accidentally knocked over a can of paint, startling the man. "Come back here, you little asshole," he yelled as I ran for dear life. I quickly hopped into my car and started the engine as he stood there in the middle of the street yelling at the top of his lungs like a lunatic. I then backed up my car, stopped, then slammed my foot on the gas, running the man over and killing him. 10 minutes later, the cops arrived and my mother was rescued and taken to the hospital. Thank God, the doctor said she was going to be fine and she was only a little dehydrated. They released her the following morning. Needless to say, my mother deleted her OnlyFans account and found another, more safer and respectable way to end her financial issues, and all was well.